allow me to introduce Donna Lee. So Donna Lee, she got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug in 1994. So she left her job as the director of communications in the public sector to start Quantum. And it's been a great job, she remembers, but she's never looked back. And as a humorous and professional wordsmith, as I mentioned, Donna Lee jumped on board to deliver this presentation to the Atlantic, and we'll be talking to us today about the power of words and effectively communicating with everyone at all levels as we get through these times together. So welcome, Donna Lee.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Look, the sun came out, so it's a good sign, right? Yeah. Would you like me to bring up my presentation?
Yeah, please. I mean, if you have it ready.
And all set to go. And it's not long, and it would be great if we can have some discussion because there is no easy answers to some of the things that we're talking about. There are some ground rules, some foundational elements, but there is customization and tailoring that always has to go on. And so that's what we're going to look at today, that balance between best practice and making it your own. And so having said that, this is the first place to start. That there is absolutely no silver bullet. There is no, if you do this, everybody will love you. If you do this, you will always get your message across. If you do this, you will communicate effectively in a crisis, in a pandemic, whatever the issue may be. There isn't one solution. There's not even a half a dozen solutions that are guaranteed to work, which from our perspective means that there is a little bit more work required on our end. We can't have a template, we can't have a document, we can't have an email, we can't have a Facebook page that's going to do all of the work for us, for all of the people that we are trying to communicate with. And the reason that there's no silver bullet is this, that we are not all the same. And because we are not all the same, we have to tailor messages to the people that we're trying to communicate with. We can do that individually, we can do that by group, but we have to recognize that what one group, one individual needs to hear and is looking for from us is not the same as what someone else may need. And so that requires a little bit more effort and thought and thinking on our part. And that's going to come up in just a second. When Tiffany and I were chatting about what we could share with you, we recognize we don't have a lot of time, and this is an issue that we could spend days, if not weeks, discussing. So we thought we'd just land on 5 things to think about that traditionally have done well from a communications perspective, in communications generally, but specifically when we're talking about communicating about a difficult issue or a difficult time. And this is the first tip. So the first thing we want to do is this. We want to increase the frequency. Now, we don't want to overwhelm people, we don't want to bombard people, and we certainly don't want to be in people's faces. But, and you were talking about this, Scott, before we officially launched, that for the essential workers out there working now, they've got the work balance, but they don't necessarily have the life balance. So when everything is going well, when everything is normal, when we have our routine in place, we have a certain amount of time for information, for contact, for connections. But when we're in the middle of a crisis, when we're in the middle of a pandemic, all of that changes. And it's not just that we seem to have a greater appetite for information, but we also seem to have a greater need to connect. And that greater need to connect means that people want to hear from us. And so we want to be reaching out. Now, we don't want to be sending them 50-page documents. You know, we don't want to be phoning them 5 times a day. But what you would normally do tends to escalate. It can be something as simple as an email that says, "Hi, just checking in, thinking of you, stay safe." It can, depending on what you do, if you're in the healthcare system, it could be sharing an update from your province with others. It can be passing along best practices or a new study. But ideally, we are reaching out a little bit more often in ways that make sense. We don't want to reach out just for the sake of reaching out, because we certainly don't want to annoy people, and we don't want people to stop paying attention to what we're saying. But there is a greater need for this. I'll give you an example that has nothing at all to do with healthcare, but shortly after Nova Scotia announced that it would be moving into the equivalent of a lockdown, about 3 or 4 days later, I get a call from my financial advisor. I never get calls from my financial advisor. You have the once a year meeting where you sit down and they go through everything, good or bad. But all of a sudden, Buddy's on the phone asking me how I'm doing. Isn't it a lovely day? How's my mom? And then we get into just a little bit about the fact that it's going to be a difficult time. Markets are going to go up and down. And I was thinking, okay, so someone's on top of things. We have a woman that comes and does my mother's nails, bless her heart, when that's allowed. She obviously can't do that now. She dropped by the other day with peanut butter cookies for my husband and I and for my mother, right? It took all of, I don't know how long it took her to make the cookies, but it took all of 2 minutes to drop them off, wave at us, say hello, but we're still talking about it. And every time we have a cookie, we're thinking of her. So it helps to establish that relationship with people. That's so critical in being able to communicate after the crisis ends, because we'll get through the crisis, but what remains is what's important. So we want to increase the frequency. The other thing we want to do is isn't that cute? We want to do more of this, which is listening, and less of this, which is speaking. So part of what we're saying is that during a crisis, it's not just that we have a need for information, that we have a need for facts, that we have a need for details, that we want to know what's changing, but we also have a need to be reassured. We also have a need to know that everything's going to be okay, that you're doing well, that I'm doing well, that even if I may be isolated, I still have connections that matter to me. And from the person that you're reaching out to, what's important is what they're feeling, what they're thinking, not necessarily what information do we want to convey, what's on our agenda, what are our key messages. So if we can spend a little bit more time listening, it will enable us, one, to provide information that is more relevant to the people or people that we're communicating with, but it will also help to build that goodwill that we were just talking about. And it's the goodwill that's ultimately going to sustain the relationship that we have with people. Because if they don't trust us, if we don't have goodwill, they stop listening altogether, whether it's a crisis, post-crisis, pre-crisis. So we really do want to take special effort to do that. This is probably very familiar to many of you, but one of the listening techniques, and it's a listening technique whether you're on Zoom, whether you're on the phone, whether you're in a room with people, it's a technique that says it's not about hearing what you have to say, because my ears work fine. It's about actually listening to what it is you're saying to me. And there's all kinds of techniques listed to active listening, but things like taking notes forces you to concentrate. For the people that were chatting just now, the mere fact that you have to take the time to chat means I'm involved, I'm engaged, and that's very important for the person that's speaking. It's also very important for others who are listening. Little things that if you can see the person's body language, does it match what they're saying? So what you're hearing, does that look? So if someone is pulling their hair out and telling you that everything is fine, we can probably conclude that no, it actually isn't. The other thing you want to do is you want to be able, with your body language and with your actions, you want to be able to demonstrate that you really are listening. And I am very guilty of this, right? I'm on the Zoom call and I'm checking the email, right? And I think I'm so cool and no one can tell. Trust me, everyone can tell when you're engaged and when you're not engaged. And there's little things you do. When you lean in, you're saying to people, okay, wow, this is interesting, I'm paying attention. When you nod, when you ask a question, all of those things indicate to someone that you want to know what it is that they're thinking or that they have to say. And that's so important when we feel like the world is out of control, when we can't control what's happening to us, when it's going on, when it's huge. We need to have a sense that we do have some control, we do have some importance, and active listening is critical to that. There's the 60-30-10 rule actually comes out of the leadership spectrum, and it looks like this. It says that if I want to communicate, how does the communication pie break down? And 60% of that is getting yourself ready. So that means that, do I have the facts I need? Do I have the statistics I need? Do I have the current journals that I want to quote from? Am I confident in my information? So that's part of it. But the other part of it is prepping yourself for the fact that these can often be difficult conversations. These can often be repetitive conversations. These can often be, oh Lord, don't let me have to hear about her dog one more time, right? And so part of the prepping yourself is making sure that when you walk into whatever it is, drafting the email, logging on to Zoom, chatting on the phone, waving from the roadway, whatever it is, that you're ready for this. You've anticipated what information is going to be helpful. You've anticipated what they're going to need from you, and you're prepared to meet that. The 30% is maintaining the relationship. And that gets us back to the frequency thing that I haven't heard from my financial advisor except for that one time. And so really what's happened until today when I'm chatting with you, I haven't thought about him at all, but yet we're all hearing about the economic impact of COVID-19. So I probably should have heard from him more than once. And so that's about maintaining the relationship during the crisis, but it's equally important about the fact that when this ends and we go back to the busy lives that we all have, we still need to maintain it. We don't need to maintain it as often and with the same intensity, but we still need to be able to maintain that relationship. And then interestingly enough, the 10% is actually the conversation, whatever form that may take. It's the actual doing of the information exchange, of the connection that you're about to make. In some ways, it sounds like that's the least important, but what the first 90% does is get you so ready for the last 10% that it usually goes fairly smoothly and fairly openly, which is what people want. And that leads us to number 4, which is to be honest. And my sense is that for much of what we're seeing here in Canada, we have a real sense of that. In Nova Scotia, our Premier and our Chief Medical Officer do a daily news conference, and it's usually reported on by most media, and we see the two gentlemen sitting there. They look concerned. Ours was the Premier who said, "Stay the blazes home," and you could feel his frustration, talking about why wouldn't people pay attention to the rules, and we needed to hear that. We don't want to be told that everything is going to be okay, don't worry, we've got this under control. In Nova Scotia, we have a nursing home called Northwood, and Northwood is struggling to contain the virus. And at one point, the CEO of Northwood went out through the media. That was her medium. She went out through the medium and she said, "We can't do it. We need help. At this point, the government has got to step in and help us manage this, or it's going to be out of control." And so people, if we know that that's the real situation, then we can understand the steps that might need to be taken to address the situation. But if we're not being told the full story, the complete story in an upfront, forthright way, two things happen. We can't make good decisions, right? So if we're not told how serious this is, a bunch of kids will go to Florida for spring break and get the coronavirus. So once we understand the situation, we can make good decisions. The other thing is, we're more likely to believe you, we're more likely to trust you, and we're more likely post-pandemic, post-crisis, we're more likely to give you a good reputation for what you've done. It doesn't detract from our sense of self as an individual or an organization. It actually gives us credibility. You may remember a number of years ago, there was an outbreak of listeria in Ontario, and there were several deaths as a result. And the outbreak was traced back to Maple Leaf Foods and a situation in the plant. And the CEO and the plant took immediate action to address this, investigated the situation, but almost daily the CEO of the organization was on one media outlet or another trying to tell people what had happened and why it had happened. Well, what happens with media after a while is can't tell the same story because it's boring, so you have to find a new story to tell. So the new story kind of shifted away from the company, the meat plant, and more into why didn't government do something? Are there no safety regulations? Was there no policies in place? How could this happen? And I remember that the CEO of Maple Leaf called a news conference. And when he first started out, he was in his suit with his lovely tie, and he was very nicely pressed, and he looked good. But by about day 14 or 15, he's a little disheveled, he's a little drawn, the hair is not quite so well put together, there's no tie, it's gone. The suit jacket is gone, and the sleeves are rolled up. And here's this poor man standing in front of the media, and his message was basically this, that there have been some questions lately as to why the government did not have safety protocols in place to prevent this. He said, I want to make it quite clear, this is not the government's fault. This issue rests solely with my company. We failed, we will do better. And there are surveys that look at customer approval rates. And before the listeria outbreak, Maple Leaf had a good approval rating of 65%, which is very high. It had a bad approval rating of 7%. During the actual crisis, its good approval rating dropped to 30%. Its bad approval rating rose to 50%. 6 months after the crisis, its bad approval rating was back at 7%. Its good approval rating went up to 85%. And that's almost unheard of. And it's because of this issue here. We can trust Maple Leaf. No one's perfect. They messed up, but when they messed up, they told us they messed up, so we're going to believe them going forward. And finally, number 5. And this is important in this world, and it's important in this world for a number of reasons. When we talk about multiple channels, we talk about how am I going to reach out to you? So I want to reach out to you if I can more often, but I also want to reach out to you in more than one way. So Tracy reached out by dropping off some peanut butter cookies for us, right? Now she sent us a little email. Somebody else might call, we're having a Zoom meeting. So the more you can diversify the way that you reach out, the less likely the people that you're trying to communicate with will feel a little overwhelmed or overburdened by your communication. You're also, in that reaching out in multiple channels, you're likely to hit the channel that's most comfortable for them. And that becomes particularly important today because some of us are more comfortable on the phone, some of us are more comfortable with email. Younger people, we're told, tend to like Zoom, but the increase in people using Zoom now is exponential, right? It may become just a standard way to communicate. So part of what you're doing is you're finding new ways to deliver your message so that the people that you're communicating with are hearing it in new environments. And it doesn't hurt to repeat messages. Repeating them within the same conversation is not as effective as repeating them the next time that you talk to them. The ultimate thing, though, of course, is that what you want to be doing is you want the communication to be relevant to their world. So whatever it is you're talking about has to be important to them. So it's little things. If you have a Zoom meeting on Wednesday, May 20th, and Scott mentions that he thinks his dog ate through his connection to Zoom, the next time you're talking to Scott, you can say, so how's the dog? Is he still eating wires? And that says to people, wow, you listened, you remembered, so obviously I mattered, right? And if I can feel valued, then I'm going to have goodwill, and that's the relationship thing. But it's also about the larger issues and it's such as respect. Well, I may prefer to talk on the phone because that's easy, but you may prefer Zoom, so I need to bend so that you will see that I'm also respecting what works for you. That's inherent in the multiple channels issue as well. And I am keeping an eye on time, and I think we're just about at our 5-minute mark before we end. So I will stop here.